All right, hello and welcome to another Expert Inside interview. My name is John Golden from Sales Pop, online sales magazine and Pipeliner CRM, joining you as usual from a sunny San Diego. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Joshua Lauer, who is in Minneapolis, Minnesota. How are you doing, Joshua?
Good. How are you?
Excellent, excellent. And Joshua is the marketing data guy most growth companies wish they had on speed dial. He is the founder of Lauer Creations Inc. has helped over 100 businesses turn messy marketing data into crystal clear growth strategies. And this is what we're going to talk about today is fixing the headaches with Google Analytics 4 and turning data chaos into marketing clarity. So Joshua, for explain a little. So, when Google brought out Google Analytics 4, it was quite it was quite an upheaval, to be honest, for a
Hmm.
lot of people, and people are still trying to get their head around it completely. I mean, I know the person who helps me with all of that is being constantly on courses, and they're in groups and they're learning. It seems like this was a major change.
Yeah, absolutely. It was. So you have kind of the previous version was an excellent tool for web analytics.
Hmm.
And kind of as that tool was evolving, Google was also rolling out like app analytics, right? Because,
Hmm.
they're like, oh, we're sort of the de facto standard for analytics, and apps are popular. And there's not really anything that had emerged as the app leader. And so they started making these like app and web properties that eventually became GA4. And what sort of seems like it happened is that the GA4 that we know today is more the app solution than it is that original page view solution that we all grew to love so much.
Hmm. And obviously, and then there's the AI component coming in as well for AI analytics too.
Yep. Yeah. And certainly you see that kind of like sprinkled throughout J4. And I'm sure we'll see more and more of it. Like some basic things are like anomaly detection, but you can kind of go to the home page and there's some questions you can ask, which you may or may not get mixed results with, depending on how you
Mhm.
worded the question and stuff like that.
Right. So what are some of the I know the ones we've had, but what are some of the major headaches people have had with GA4?
I mean, I think some of the big ones are like out of the gates, annotations weren't there. They have
Mhm.
now been released, thankfully. Advanced segments, if you're used to looking at like a standard report and saying, I want to throw a segment on where I'm looking at this, but only for mobile or something like that, or
Mhm.
whatever the filters were, those exist, but they're very hidden and they don't work quite how they used to work. You used to be able to kind of do drill downs where you could look at a report
Yeah.
and there'd be a blue link and then click into that and see more detail about that. That's not really a thing. So it's all kind of similar, but very different than it used to be.
Yeah. So how does somebody approach that? Like, what is the best way? Like I said, I mean, we've even have our person is like constantly educating themselves on all of the changes. But what would you say is the first thing people should do in order to address these issues?
I think it's important to understand kind of how the framework is being approached today versus how it used to be. And what I mean by that is the at least out of the gate originally GA4 was primarily event based
Hmm.
and user based. So we're all used to like the sessions in the world of like GA sessions, and a lot of that stuff has been added on now. But I think it's very apparent that a session was not a first class citizen in GA4.
Hmm.
So kind of a big band-aid that really does actually work pretty effectively is to use Looker Studio, previously Google Data Studio, to connect GA4 to that. And then kind of, that tool has things like drill downs and you can sort of replicate a lot of the, older reports using that. And if you want to get more advanced, or maybe you're more like, hey, since Google decided to throw away all the data I collected in the previous version of it, you might be like, well, I don't want that to happen again. So you're also potentially looking into Google Cloud Platform and syncing GA4 data to BigQuery, where you can save it and house it and pay for your own data there with no fear of it being tossed out because someone decides it's time for it to go.
Hmm. Yeah, it's always a challenge, isn't it, Joshua, when something that's working pretty well, and they take it and they decide to improve it and release
Yep.
something that people are just tearing their hair out over.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, you don't know what you're missing until it's gone to an
Mhm.
extent, right? So like, it's exciting to see a new tool. I remember when it first came out, the thing that kind of scared me was it sounded like everything was going to auto track, and I was like, I'm going to be out of a job, you know.
Right, right.
And after seeing some of those things, like as an example, PDF downloads are pretty common on websites if
Mhm.
you're kind of in the B2B space. And I would think one of the first things I want to know outside of how many downloads is what's being downloaded.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the first things I looked for on a site that had the downloads or the PDFs being downloaded. And I get in there and I can't find that. It's a built-in thing. It's automatically tracking, and it seems like it's kind of one of the first things you would ask about. And there's no like ability to see what files are being downloaded. So that's kind of an interesting nuance. Another automatically tracking thing is the scrolls, which is we got 90% of the way down the page.
Mm.
And with scroll tracking and Google Tag Manager, we can do 25, 50, 75, 100% on the page. We can also say we want to know when a certain element was scrolled into being visible. So there's a lot of nuance that you can track if you know how. But I think the main thing, right? Like we all start with the default, and
Mhm.
the original GA, UA, GA3, whatever you want to call that, was really well thought out for analyzing web experiences. And then when GA4 comes around, we're event based and we're like we forgot what a web experience really was, because not really. I think because we wanted to
Yeah.
enhance the tool and make it more capable of things beyond just like web analytics. But I think it's also important to realize there are so many sites out there that web analytics are very important, and page views are always going to be a thing as long as we have web browsers.
Yeah, no, absolutely, 100%. So what are some of the best practices that you would advise people when starting with GA4?
I think I'm very out of the gate. What is the most important thing that you need to track on your
Mhm.
website, right? So whether it's e-commerce or whether it's, sales forms or what have you, like let's identify the thing where like if you didn't have this data, you'd be hard pressed to justify like the investment that is your website, right? So like we need to for sure make that track, right? And then outside of that, um, any kind of the standard things like make sure that your ads are all tagged appropriately and you're tracking everything. Of course, you know, obviously if you're familiar with previous versions of Google Analytics, you're probably taking care of those things, but there's still sort of basics that can get missed, like especially some tools like Google Ads has the auto connect feature.
Mhm.
And so, you might grow to sort of depend on something like that. I think because of the fact that now the data goes to GA4, but it might go other places, it's important to combine any automatic tracking with a manual tracking strategy as well. So you want to be putting things on those URLs as you're using, email, Facebook, Google Ads, Bing ads, TikTok, whatever, LinkedIn ads. You want to make sure those are tagged with UTMs so that
Mhm.
as they come into your system, you're able to, whether it happens to be going to BigQuery or you've got a CRM that you're sending the data to, you're going to want to be able to kind of bring that all together and make sense out of it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things, isn't it, that a lot of people struggle with is tagging things properly and making sure that they. I think there's two things: is tagging things properly, and then there is the opposite: is tracking too much.
Yeah. Yeah. So on the on the idea of tracking too much, it's sort of uh kind of a spray and pray approach, if you will. It's like it's easy to be like, oh, I can go in here and track every
Mhm.
single click. And it's tempting to do that because then you're like, well, if somebody asks me something, I'll be able to come back later on and be like, yeah,
Mhm.
of course that was tracking. Because that's that's a better kind of answer than saying like, actually, we didn't track that,
Yeah.
or it seems like it is. But the truth is, when you go back to that data that you sort of haphazardly decided to track with everything, it's a lot harder to know because websites change over time. We
Yep.
roll out new features, we redesign this, what have you. So like you might look at the website today and then look at something that was tracking 3 months ago, And, because it was just everything, now you're trying to figure out what it actually was, but there's nothing on the current website that'll give you any clues or any hints. And so you're going to spend a lot of time sort of chasing your tail, so to speak, trying to figure out what actually happened versus just taking an approach of this is what's important. This is what we want to track. We're going to set that up and we're going to call it exactly what it is so that we don't have to ask ourselves,
Right.
what is this later on? It should be easy enough that you look at that event or whatever you named it and you're like, oh, clearly that means a form got submitted.
Hmm.
Maybe, so like if you're looking at something and going, what is that? Well, now we have a problem because instead of analyzing the data and knowing what you're looking at, you're trying to figure out how it was built and analyzing how the tracking setup works is not the point of having a tracking setup, right?
Yeah,
The whole
yeah,
point
no,
is to deliver insights.
no, and absolutely, and like you said, insights that matter as well, not just like tracking everything. And also, I think sometimes people like try to use tools incorrectly. Like, I mean, say if you want to really understand like user behavior on your site, like something like a Hotjar is more appropriate for it. And I feel sometimes like people you know don't understand what the tool is designed for and think maybe it does more than it does.
Yeah, and it's a great point. So GA is going to tell you what happened, assuming you got the tracking all sorted out,
Mhm,
but it doesn't tell you why it happened, right? So
mhm,
having a solution in place that can collect that, and in theory, there's ways that you could collect something like that with GA4. Granted, as you pointed out, Hotjar is probably a better solution,
mhm,
but you could have a little pop-up form that's even powered by your email tool that just has a survey in it, and then you could fire some event tracking on that to kind of capture the sort of the juicy bits of like what's the part that matters that's sort of anonymous that
mhm,
I could go into GA4 then and see sort of all the responses and how they're sort of distributed. So there's ways to kind of track some of those things, but certainly, yeah, like it's not uncommon where you I'll get a question about, hey, we saw this big spike from this thing over the
mhm,
weekend, but we didn't have anything special going on. So like, like why is that happening? And could be bots, it could be a number of things. It could be that like uh something we did or something the business did months ago suddenly got picked up and resyndicated somewhere else and there's new interest in it. And so, certainly all things that you would dig into and potentially shed some light on. But yeah, that why is a very important part of what's going on because I think internally we all as business people and business leaders have this idea of I want to sell this to these people and they're probably going to come to this page. I'm going to tell them a little bit about us and then they're, just a little bit and then we'll click another button and then we'll give them a little bit more information and we're going to have them go through 5 pages before we end up asking them to fill out a form.
mhm,
And maybe that's a nice like sort of curated experience, but if it turns out that, you're doing such a good job with your marketing efforts, maybe they don't need to go through that curated experience. They just want the button to get to the form immediately. And so the analytics, if you've kind of planned it out, is going to help you see like how people actually get to the content and the sort of KPIs that matter to you.
yeah, and you just touched on something there that I think is the perennial issue that marketing has, is that, I mean, like you said, I mean, you could get a sudden spike to your website or to a particular page, and it's difficult to figure out what drove that. But they could have been a combination of a bunch of marketing activities, maybe ones that you did 6 months ago, maybe, as you said, maybe it was something you had in PR and it's only just gotten like syndicated or picked up. And so sometimes it's very hard to actually be able to pinpoint where your increased traffic is coming from. And I think that's a frustration that all marketing people have, because of that, the nature of it, having you have to do all these multiple things and they kind of
Mhm.
work together, but you can't isolate.
Yeah, exactly. So then that kind of opens up the discussion for like marketing mix modeling, which is, something that's a lot easier to do if you've got really quality data
Mhm,
tracking in the first place. Um, you also need to have your like sort of impressions and clicks from all the ad platforms on
mhm,
hand and, know what you spent and stuff like that. But certainly those kinds of things can shed some light on that halo effect that that marketing produces, right? And so that's something that's, we're in a digital world. We feel like we can measure everything, and yet marketing produces a halo effect, right? So
Mhm.
like, how do you quantify that? And we've got
Mhm.
multi-channel attribution modeling in GA4. It's data-driven attribution modeling, where another thing about the previous version of GA is you could choose between, like, I don't know, 6 or more potential
Right.
attribution sort of methods, and you could put them side by side and kind of see. And there's a way to do that today, but you don't have as many options because they've kind of folded a bunch of that into the data driven stuff. Which, I think, my take on that is that it's an AI that's sort of looking at the results of all those, and then sort of coming to a conclusion about which one really deserves the credit at the time.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's an interesting approach. And where do you see this? Where do you see this going? Because as you said, I mean, they Google is continually kind of like enhancing and tweaking, and obviously, I mean, they're obviously getting a lot of feedback, I would say.
Yeah, over the past 3 years, I've seen more and more of the features that were missing from sort of classic UA
Mhm.
analytics have been rolling out. So like, I think we're going to continue to see that. We're going to continue to see the interface return to its like form, so to speak, as far as like what we're missing from it.
Right.
I think along those lines, though, people are going to also continue to embrace what's new about GA4, which is really that event based, sort of platform. And you've got this ability to add key value pairs to any event, right? So we can say, for example, if you're on an e-commerce site and you're looking at a product page, we could say, if you have reviews going on, what was
Mhm.
the average review rating when somebody was on that page, right? Or how many reviews were there? So then we could look
Right.
at the page and see how many reviews have been populating over time, outside of just taking the reviews platform, the review platform analytics. That's a mouthful.
Mhm.
So, different things. Perhaps like maybe you have a e-commerce site and you've got photos of product, and you want to see how many if there's a carousel, are they clicking through the photos? Does an interaction with like a big zoom up window, does that correlate to more add to carts? you know um, there's potentially recommendations on a page
Mhm.
like that. Are people clicking on those? So all those things, there's some standard things, but then there's going to be unique things to like how you see the business that you're going to want to track. And
Mhm.
you've got that ability to say, yeah, I'd like to track this. I'd like to know about this or that, and not just say where it was before, kind of spoon fed to you, like, here's how you measure this stuff.
Right.
You can kind of now dig in and tailor it more to yourself, which also means, as we get more and more GA4 sites out there and more people realize that, it's going to be a much more challenging sort of thing to go from one account to another, because there is less overall standardization because of how customizable it actually is.
Yeah, and the other thing that now, because a lot of people are using AI as their search engine, right? And we're seeing some of that. You can track some of that data coming through GA4. How is do you know how that's working? Because I mean, we're a little skeptical right now of the accuracy of that information.
Yeah, so, the whole internet is basically a bunch of links, right?
Hmm.
At And so if we're using ChatGPT and a site comes up and we click to it, ultimately ChatGPT can decide if they wanna send that referral data along, right? The
Hmm.
site that is linking to you has basically the ability to say, "I will tell the site you're going to
Hmm.
where you came from or not." And along with, how that all works, it can say, in fact, you came from just this site.com, or if they wanna share more, they could say exactly what page they came from. But, as we get into this more sort of secure internet world, you more and more see that sites just say they came from this site, right? So we
Hmm.
know, okay, somebody came from ChatGPT. We can track that. We can see that as a source, basically a referral source, and then we just
Yeah.
go in there and classify it as a GPT or a AI source, whatever we would want to call that. And I think right now there's this whole kind of buzz in the marketing world of like, like how do we kind of take, advantage of the AI and get more traffic from the AI? And I think it's sort of a little bit like wild west. I don't think
Yeah.
anyone's cracked the code to like how the AI works, but
Yeah.
I do think there's ways that you could probably uh, sort of coach people through strategic marketing to ask AIs certain questions that might be more likely to surface your business. Of
Yeah.
course, that's another marketing play, right? Like how do you kind of get people to ask the right prompts for you to show up?
Yeah, no, no, absolutely, absolutely, and I think that's where we're going to see a lot of changes over the next while. As I said, because people are gravitating towards AI as their first choice when they're looking for something. But I think I love the AI works the same way as Google really works, and that is quality content, like in high quality and high validated content.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I think is somewhat humorous right now is that um, I don't know if you remember this, but there's a site that is kind of a joke. It's called "Let Me Google That for You," and it's sort of
Mhm.
meant to like troll people, right? If they ask you a question, you're like, you could Google that in 2 seconds and have the
Yeah,
answer. You can punch in a search query and then share this link, and they'll click on the link, and when it opens up, it'll look like someone's typing a Google search for you, and then you get to see the result. And like 10 years ago, when people were using this more, like it was sort of a goofy, like, "Oh, gee,
yeah,
thanks," like
right.
kind of thing. And now it's like you go ask ChatGPT a question, and it says searching the web. So it's essentially Googling that for you and then giving you those results.
Mhm.
So I think also on that note, if you're really kind of using an AI like that, especially the AI overviews, in my experience, like there are subjects that I Google quite regularly to see what happens, right? And
Mhm.
quite often, like it'll be so close to being right, but there's a detail or a piece of nuance that it misses,
Yeah,
and that kind of changes the entire thing, right? So I think if we think about speaking different like languages, like there are words here and there that can completely flip a sentence upside
yeah.
down. I think we still have that issue with AI not fully understanding what humans really mean. And so it's easy. And I think that's what people like about it, right? We all want the
Mhm.
shortcut. We want the
Oh, yeah.
easier way. We
We
want the
want that old
insight.
we had that
Yeah.
old what was it? The old Staples red easy red button.
Yeah, exactly. That was easy.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and I think and that's why I think I mean AI is great, but I think you have to use it intelligently. It's like if you're just going to produce a blog post and just have AI write it for you and not even bother reading it yourself or going through you're going to end up with some interesting blog posts. Eventually, somebody's going to pull up a sentence from it and say, "What exactly did you mean by this?" Because it doesn't actually make any sense.
right. Yeah, and I mean, on that front, I've done a little bit of the coding with
Mm,
AI kinda helping out in that respect, and along the lines of it not making sense, you'll maybe kind of start typing some code, and then it sort of auto completes for you, and you can kinda hit enter, and you're
mm,
like, "Wow, how did it know what I wanted to do?" And it looks like it's the right idea, and later on, 20, 30 lines of code later, when I'm sort of
mhm.
deeper in an analysis, I'm like, why am I not seeing like data for like the time frame I set? Like
Yeah.
that doesn't make sense. And I end up going back and it's that piece that came from the AI where I was like so impressed by the autocomplete in the moment that I didn't really fully evaluate what it was
Uh,
doing. And it turns out it kind of had an idea what I was trying to do, but it didn't really. And so in trusting it in that moment, it seemed like it saved me all this time, but then I lost that time trying to figure out why it wasn't working the right way in the first place. So just, you know, make sure you're kind of validating along the way
yeah.
because and I think, like the whole kind of thing that I feel like is kind of in the zeitgeist right now is like AI plus humans is better than either one of them alone.
Yeah, 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 and I think that is true. I mean, I think that's because that's kind of our attitude, especially around sale. People are always like, "Oh, AI is going to replace salespeople," and we're going, it may replace some very kind of frontline low level, but real no salespeople who use AI will replace salespeople who don't.
Right. Well, I mean, and I think to that I would ask, like, are you selling to a person or a robot? Because if you're selling to robots, AI is probably going to do a great job at that. But like at last I checked, most companies are run by humans.
No, absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, listen, this has been great. This has been great, Joshua. All of Joshua's information will be below with this video. But before we go, please do remind people what you do.
Yes, I am a marketing intelligence professional that will help get your Google Analytics squared away and get you on track to making sure you can trust your data.
Excellent. All right. Well, listen, thanks again, Joshua. Thank you for watching and listening. I'll see you all again very soon. Thank you.